employment rights require jobs. These rights are meaningless unless the economy is performing properly. The European Union is a zone of the Eurozone which is producing massive youth unemployment. Its economic growth, it's the only continent other than Antarctica which has had lower growth. But in terms of your employment rights, what I find so extraordinary is the kind of lack of confidence that this country isn't strong enough to make sure that we continue those rights which we brought. Even when a Labour government introduced the minimum wage, even the Tories, not only could they not abolish it because the British people wouldn't vote them in if they hadn't been careful of this, it made it a living wage. We are strong, we're protecting the rights, and workers' rights are meaningless unless you've got a job.
It's the confidence to stand up for those rights within the United Kingdom is the point that Gisela Stuart is making.
I think that people are more likely to have a job if we have a thriving economy. We're more likely to have that in the European Union, and that is why all the major trade unions, representing 4 million workers in this country, are actively campaigning for us to remain in the European Union. And, you know, there is a threat to workers' rights from people who are working on the Leave campaign. Priti Patel, the employment minister in the current government, made a speech where she said the EU employment regulation was unnecessary and meddlesome and should be cut in half. Is she talking about paid holiday? Is she talking about maternity or paternity leave, protection for agency workers? And they need to come clean in the Leave campaign. Which rights would they take away?
Boris Johnson. Absolutely none.
Sorry, for clarification, you said absolutely none.
I want to know whether that counts as being miserable or negative or fear-based in your approach.
Let me answer that directly, Boris.
We've said very clearly that we want to protect the rights of people in the workplace. Indeed, people bash up the Conservative Party. Actually, it was William Johnson Hicks who gave women the right to vote in this country. I think that Labour has still to produce a woman leader of the party, though maybe Angela Eagle will sort that out at some stage.
Boris, beware of the blonde bombshell.
Our courts, our parliament uphold the rights of women at work, the rights of everybody at work. We have pioneered these things in this country. We should be incredibly proud of it. We do not need the European Union to guarantee our humanity.
On that specific point, Nicola Sturgeon.
The thing is, to answer Gisela directly, I don't have confidence that politicians like Boris Johnson would keep these protections. Why do I not have confidence? Because this is what Boris said. The weight of employment regulation is now back-breaking. We should get rid of the Collective Redundancies Directive, the Workers' Directive, the Working Time Directive and 1,000 more. That's what Boris Johnson wants to do if he manages to get us out of the European Union and have unfettered control of these things. I don't want that.
For clarification, just briefly, would you like to answer that? And I'll come to Andrea.
I'd like to be absolutely clear.
That's what you said.
Our side is determined to protect the rights of workers, and I think it's absolutely absurd.
Well, you're not telling the truth then.
Absolutely absurd.
So why did you
Boris, this is important. You're asking people.
Scare stories about what would happen outside.
I'm quoting
Mr. Johnson, thank you.
These are protected by our courts.
Mr. Johnson, please allow Nicola Sturgeon to just put that point again and respond.
Boris Johnson is asking people to trust his word. He's making a lot of claims and he's asking you to trust him and vote the way he wants you to vote in 2 weeks' time. Now, I'm simply asking him, if he's telling the truth tonight about the protection of workers' rights, was he not telling the truth when he said he wanted to get rid of all of the ones I've just listed? You think the thing is, Boris Johnson is not interested in your job or your protection. He's only interested in David Cameron's job.
Thank you.
I think it's very important that people recognise that under our proposals, everything we've said, and I know that Gisela agrees with this very strongly, we do not want to see any attrition of the rights of people at work. That is not what we're campaigning for. We're campaigning to take back control of our economy and our legislative system. And I'd like to challenge the Remain campaign to say whether they agree with absolutely every jot and tittle of EU law. Do they accept every one of the 2,000 regulations that comes from Brussels every year? Do they think it a good thing that our business is weighed down with regulation that costs £600 million?
OK, thank you. You've made that point. I'll go to Amber Rudd and then...
I think you need to... I think the question needs to make her judgment based partially on the company that the Vote Leave keep. When we talk about Nigel Farage, do you think he's going to be a champion for women's rights? Was it him or was it another one who said women should wash behind the back of their fridge? And there's a publication called Economists for Brexit, and in it they call for specific deregulation of climate change, of banking and, yes, of gender issues, gender equality for women. Now, that may not be what Boris is saying about himself, but that is the company, that is the campaign that calls for deregulation. Okay. Absolutely, we're better off in.
Gisela is exactly right. The point is it's not up to them. You know, we now have 5 presidents of the EU. Can anyone name them? Can anyone even name what jobs they do?
They're all men.
They're all men, exactly right. We can't get rid of them. We didn't vote for them. We've got no chance against them, so we're entirely in their hands.
Thank you. Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, I'm just laughing at hearing the Leave side decry the lack of democracy. In this country right now, every single law that comes out of Westminster is influenced by 900 unelected people in the House of Lords. It's absolutely laughable to hear them lecture us about democracy. But the fact of the matter is, these are really important protections, not just for us, but for people across the European Union. Why is it important that they go right across the EU? So that big multinational companies or right-wing politicians can't force a race to the bottom. It's about protecting workers, whether we're working here or British workers or Scottish workers working in other parts of the European Union. They're vital protections and we should not put them in the hands of Boris Johnson and co.
Thank you very much. For all that, we're going to draw a line there.
And other veterans have served this country. I know what sovereignty means to me, but I want to know what it means to you.
Len, thank you very much indeed. And I'll turn first to Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, I don't know that there's any bigger supporter of countries being independent on this panel than I am. I've spent all of my adult life campaigning for Scotland to be independent. I believe countries should be independent. The UK right now is independent, just as France and Germany and Sweden and Denmark and Ireland are all independent. But I also passionately believe that in the modern, globalised, interdependent world we live in today, independent countries have to work together for the benefit of all of us, because there are some big issues that no single country can tackle alone. Protection of workers' rights, climate change, global security. We need to work together as independent countries. That's what I stand for.
Nicola Sturgeon, thank you. Andrea Leadsom.
What sovereignty means to me is it's inextricably tied up with democracy, and ultimately what it is that you, the people, are in charge. And if you don't like the government of the day, you need to be able to sack us. That's what gives us our sovereignty, is because you are in charge, and if we mess up, you get rid of us. Now, the problem with being in the European Union is that can't happen. 60% of our rules and regulations are made by people we don't even know their names, let alone their job titles. None of them are British, and we can't get rid of them. And regardless of which government you choose, they continue in that same mould. You cannot get rid of them. We need to take back control.
Angela Eagle.
Well, look, the House of Commons says only 13% of
Acts
our
of Parliament.
rules are actually come from the European Union. But I think sovereignty means to me having confidence in our ability to project our values in an international world, and we need to work with others where it's in our national interest to do so, and pool sovereignty in certain areas, because we can achieve more working with each other than we ever could do alone. That's part of the Labour Party's Clause 4. It's what we agree with as a political party. It's part of our political credo, and I think we need to be confident enough to know that we can work in NATO, in the UN, that we can work in the European Union and make our influence count.
We'll turn to Labour's Gisela Stuart.
I want to thank the armed forces and the veterans for what they've done for this country. They have defended democracy. And that is a question on the 23rd of June. Do you defend democracy? Do you take the right to control? Because to me, the essence is that you, the people, can get rid of us, the people who make the rules on your behalf. And there are checks and balances, our courts, there are all those kind of systems there. But in the current structure of the European Union, particularly now that you've got a single currency, a whole lot of decisions are currently made and will have to continue to be made without that accountability. So sovereignty for me is to take control, and you can remove us.
Gisela Stuart, thank you. Andrea.
Sovereignty is being in control of our destiny. But a man on an island on his own is sovereign. Now, I experienced as Cabinet Minister going to Paris at the end of last year, where I saw Nicola, in order to address a really dangerous international problem of climate change. And we got an international deal to deal with it. And we got it while the UK was leading the EU negotiations. We were able to get an international deal that was in our interest, in families at home's interest, because we were at the European Union setting the terms of that deal. Being sovereign means having influence outside of the United Kingdom. That's what we get by being in the European Union.
Amber Rudd, thank you, and Boris Johnson.
And we can have exactly that influence and more if we take back control and come out of the EU. Because what happens within the EU is that we are more outvoted than any other country. We have 60% of our laws now coming from Brussels. Chuka Amuna himself has confirmed that, with your friend Angela. And our sovereignty, for me, belongs to the people. It's their ability to kick out at elections the people who take the decisions. Let me tell you, there's nowhere else in the world that is engaged in this kind of experiment of fusing countries together to create a superstate, a United States of Europe. It is anti-democratic.
Thank you very much for your opening statements. Amber Rudd.
I just think you need to level with people, Boris, and be frank about the fact that we do have influence in the world by being part of a stronger grouping. That was my direct experience. And we are only, in climate change, say, 1% of the world's emissions. And there were 3 blocs negotiating, the EU, China and the US. And if we had just been on our own, we wouldn't have been able to have that influence.
Let me give you a classic example of how the EU lets us down and lets down consumers and people who are victims of pollution. And indeed, people who oppose climate change. When you look at what happened with the VW scandal, that was a complete masterclass in the collusion between Brussels bureaucrats, the well-paid lobbyists, and the motor manufacturing industry to conceal what was really going on. Millions of people bought diesel engines, bought diesel cars on false pretences, and our ability to improve our air quality in our cities was sharply reduced. Okay. And that was a disaster caused by the absence of democracy and the lack of control. We take back control, we're better able to deal with those problems.
I don't accept that that's the case. What I do say is that when you mention climate change, and pollution is the same, we don't want to do this on our own. We have to have the influence and the reach of doing it internationally, because it's an international problem.
Andrea, Leadsom.
So I would just say, as Amber will agree, the UK Climate Change Act of 2008 is what set our climate change ambition. It was a UK act, it's got nothing to do with the EU, and it will endure. But can I just also suggest that one of the key areas that we are losing control of is in taxes. VAT on fuel bills. We are unable to get rid of VAT on fuel bills because the EU prevents us from doing so, in spite of fuel poverty. Not only that, but the EU is also looking at introducing, some of them, a financial transactions tax that, even though we vetoed that, theoretically, will still cost our pension funds £4 billion if it gets implemented in the EU.
Shadow Business Secretary Angela.
And you get in there and you negotiate. If we came out of the EU, our pension funds would still want to invest in the EU. It's a very large market for them. I'll tell you, I think in a globalised world, we're better able to stand up for ourselves when we're part of multinational bodies, and we ought to be confident enough to know that we can get our way when we engage properly. And there are advantages to us doing that. Are we going to turn our backs on our nearest neighbours? Are we going to turn our backs on the rest of the world and somehow hope we can have a position in the world like we had 42 years ago before we joined the European Union?
Let's put that point to Gisela, Stuart.
Of course, we're still going to be in all the international bodies. We'll be part of the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the UN Security Council, all these things. But what we will not be part of is a sclerotic creature that had a noble idea in the 1950s that demands supremacy of its laws. And what we've seen over the last 20 years, the waves of globalisation, whether it's services, people or goods, this institution has not been able to deal with it. And the environment, actually, it doesn't need to be dealt with in one of the blocks. It is in the units of sovereign accountability and then the whole world. The EU just gets in the way.
Nicola Sturgeon.
I just wonder what kind of dreadful message it will send to the world for the UK to decide to turn its back on Europe and the world to look in on itself and cut ourselves off. Yes, we've got our own climate change legislation. Scotland's got the most ambitious climate change targets in the world. But we won't meet our climate change ambitions unless all countries work together. And working together is not about giving up independence.
Yes.
Imagine if you went to France or Germany or Ireland or Denmark or Sweden or any other country in the European Union and said, you're not independent countries. They would laugh at you for that. Independence and interdependence are two sides of the same coin in the modern world.
OK,
we should not turn our backs on the world.
I think it's curious to hear this from Nicola, because she's obviously keener to be ruled by Brussels than she is by Westminster politicians. But for me, the most important point is that actually we do increase our influence if we come out, because very often what's happening is that the European Union is trying to replace the UK in conversations, for instance, in the IMF or many other, the UN, international bodies. Take the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, where Britain used to have a powerful voice. The EU now wants to speak for us, and when the EU can't decide its position, there is no UK position. That is a disaster for people who care about endangered animals in this country.
Can I put, leaving the endangered animals, special though they are, I'd just like to point the point that you made. I'm not disagreeing on that basis at all. I'd just like to take the point that you made to Nicola Sturgeon about rules from Brussels and ask you to respond.
I don't think I'm betraying any secrets here when I say I want Scotland to be an independent country. But if Scotland becomes an independent country, I'd want Scotland to be an independent country in the European Union and in the single market, because as an independent country, I'd want us to work with other independent countries for the greater good. That's how the modern world works, and turning away from that is not the answer to the problems that Boris Johnson would seem to want us to believe it is. Working with other countries. You know, I was at Glasgow University last Friday talking to some of our students who'd done part of their degree in other European countries, to European students who were here studying. That mix of cultures, that diversity, that learning from each other is one of the reasons why the European Union has helped guarantee the longest period of peace on the continent in modern times.
I would just like to say that it is quite extraordinary that Nicola, quite rightly, achieved a once-in-a-generation referendum for the Scots only 2 years ago. Now, when we have a referendum in this great United Kingdom of ours, we listen to what the people tell us, and then we go away and we fulfil their instructions. And when we vote leave on June the 23rd, I have no doubt that the entire government will get behind the negotiation and make it a success. But isn't it interesting that Nicola, in spite of the people of Scotland saying 55 to 45, they want to remain in the United Kingdom, she is determined to have another go because it was the wrong answer. Isn't that what the EU tries to do when people give them the wrong answer?
Thank you.
She's not a Democrat.
Just respond to that very briefly, and I'm going to bring in Andrea.
Yeah, I don't think, as I say, it's any secret what I stand for in terms of independence, but I'm putting that to one side tonight. I'm standing here because I want the people across the UK to vote to stay in the EU, because I think that's better for Scotland, and I think it's better for the whole UK. That's the argument I'm making, not just to this audience, but to people across the country.
And just on the point of information, if the UK votes to leave, would there be another referendum?
I'm not here tonight speculating about what happens in the event of a Brexit vote. I'm here tonight arguing the case for Remain.
Thank you.
Because it's in the best interest of people across the UK.
This does raise an important point, which is the union. And the fact is that we are a great and proud country, Great Britain. And the fact is, just listening to this, we know that if we vote to leave, there will be an issue with the union. We've had two former Prime Ministers in Ireland today pointing out the issue there, where once more, vote leave have no plan for what the border would look like. We don't know. There is danger to the union as well from this proposal to leave.
There is a successful union, and it's the United Kingdom. It has adapted and it has changed, and it has always responded to the demands of the people. There's an unsuccessful union, and it's called the European Union. It has a single currency, which reduces unemployment, and that's why I think I stick with a successful union, and for that reason, I say vote leave.
Let's bring in Angela Eagle, and perhaps we can just go back to the original question from Len. He said, I know what sovereignty means to me, I want to know what it means to you.
Well, I think we are a proud, sovereign nation. who've made a decision to pool a small amount of our sovereignty so that we can have a bigger influence in the continent, which are our near neighbours. And I think we should be confident enough in our own democratic values, in our own ways of negotiating, to know that we get our way in those circumstances more often than we don't. They are so pessimistic about our ability in this country. And I'm fed up of listening to Vote Leave telling us we're not in control of anything. We are.
I just find that extraordinary. This isn't a pooling of sovereignty. This is a takeover by an unelected European superstate. It's absolute nonsense to say it's a pooling of sovereignty. We cannot control our borders. We cannot control our taxes. We cannot control the rules and regulations. And yet the European Union is failing to negotiate trade. It's a disaster, and it's getting worse. We have to take back control and get back in charge of our own economy.
We need to stop misleading people on the role that we play in the European Union. We win those votes. I presume you're talking about the Council of Ministers votes. 95% of the times. We get our way. We are a strong country. We are one of the top influencers for the outcomes within the European Union. We are not a passenger in this. We are a leader in this. Don't let them con you that it's anybody else.
I only wish that were true. I only wish that were true. We are outvoted more than any other country, 72 times in the last 20 years. And we are unable to stop further transfers of sovereignty, which is what the gentleman asked about. Further control is going to be passed to Brussels by the 5 presidents' report as they try to bubblegum the euro together. We are going to be asked to pay for it. It's been perfectly clear from what the government has done with our budgetary payments that those are going to continue. Another 2.4 billion they're going to ask for as soon as this referendum is over. And we have absolutely no way of stopping it.
Thank you. We'll just conclude the question there on sovereignty, and thanks to Len for that question. Thank you, all of you, very much indeed on that issue.
I would just say use your common sense. You know, you're the best experts when it comes to this decision. So ask yourself the questions. Is it better for jobs in the economy if we're trading in a market of 500 million people rather than 65 million people? Is it going to make us more able to tackle big global issues like climate change and security if we work together rather than working on our own? Will we be better able to protect workers' rights, not just here, but right across the continent, if we pool sovereignty to work together? So apply your own common sense. I'm the last person that's going to defend scaremongering. I was on the receiving end of it for 2 years in the independence campaign. Use your common sense, and your common sense will tell you to vote Remain.
Nicola Sturgeon, thank you.
I agree with Boris. We need to look at the facts here. The UK is the world's 5th biggest economy. We speak the world's international business language. We have the world's best contract law. We are part of a commonwealth of 2.3 billion consumers, most of whose economies are growing faster than any economy in the EU. Our trade exports to the EU have flatlined over 10 years and gone down dramatically over the last few. We have enormous strengths in the world, both in soft power and in hard trading power. The future, when we take back control and vote to leave, is very bright indeed.
Andrea Leadsom, thank you.
There are bailouts that we get exemption from. There are vetoes that the Prime Minister has secured. We have a separate, different arrangement within the European Union to other people, which gives us the best of both
Nicola
worlds.
Sturgeon.
Well, I think we've just heard there 3 things that are just not true. I mean, we have no control over criminals coming in. People are checked at the borders against security and terrorist lists. There are European nationals that are turned away from the border if they're thought to be a threat. That's the first thing. Secondly, this 5 presidents' report is about integration for Eurozone countries. It doesn't apply to the UK because we ain't in the Eurozone. And then thirdly, Turkey. For goodness sake, every single European Union country has a veto over Turkey entering. And that's assuming Turkey meets the criteria, which they're a million miles away from doing. These are scaremongering arguments, and you shouldn't listen to them.
Arithmetic tells me that you lose control if it's 2 versus 31.
OK, let me put this to the other side. Angela Eagle.
Look, I think that you shouldn't scare about the decisions that are going to have to be made by Eurozone countries to integrate because they've got a single currency. We do not have a single currency. They have their own group to decide how they are going to deal with that, and that is up to them. It doesn't affect us, but we still have access to the single market. We have access. We're not in Schengen, but we are in control of our own borders, but that allows us to ensure that the Dublin arrangements work and refugees have to go back to the country where they first came in to register. These are all positives that we get from engaging with Europe that you would throw away because you're scaremongering about what's going on in the Eurozone.
And I think, actually, there are two ways in which we are very heavily impacted by what's going on in the Eurozone. Number one, I'm afraid it is true that we will be sucked into those further arrangements to keep the euro together, and we will have to be involved in the bailouts. Number two, I'm afraid that the disaster in the Eurozone area is producing very considerable migratory flows on a scale that we haven't seen for a very long time. And that is, as long as we are part of the EU, we cannot escape from the consequences of that. If we come out and we take back control, there's one thing I do agree very strongly both with Amber and with Nicola, is that there is a tariff-free zone all the way from Iceland to Russia. We're part of that. We would continue to be part of that, and we would prosper.
Nicola Sturgeon.
I just, you know, Boris keeps saying that, but it's not true. You take countries like Norway or Switzerland who are outside the EU, but in this single market free tariff zone, they pay into the European Union. They have to abide by all of the rules. You know, I simply say the question was about scaremongering. We've got a mixture from Boris and the Leave campaign of scares and downright untruths in this campaign. Trust yourself. Trust your common sense. We're in the modern world today. Surely it's better as independent countries, and I hope Scotland will be one of them in the not-too-distant future, but as independent countries working together for the good of all of us. That's what the European Union is about.
Can we come back to the issue of tax? Because I'd be very interested to hear what the Remain side have to say about the EU's plans to give all of us, as citizens of the United Kingdom, a European tax number. I'd also like to know what the Remain side have to say about the fact that the EU is refusing to allow us to fine multinational companies who've refused to pay their taxes and are in fact making us pay them back around £7 billion over the next few years of taxes they failed to pay in the United Kingdom. Let's go to the Shadow Business Secretary, Angela.
Look, I think that what you need to see is that with a single market of the size that the European Union gives us, we can actually have a good effect on global multinational companies. For example, Google has got an Apple, and these big companies have to deal with a body the size of the European Union if they want to sell into it, and that actually gives you more power. That actually gives you more power to make sure that you get your taxes right. I wouldn't.
It's the opposite. They get huge tax breaks to go to Luxembourg.
All right. Thank you, Angela. Just finish quickly.
I mean, the Luxembourg issue is about a national issue of tax, where Luxembourg is competing with Ireland to have low taxes. If you have a race, if you have a race to the bottom, that's what happens.
Thank you very much. And there, on that question, we must leave it. Thank you all for your contributions. If we take back control on June the 23rd, means that we will once again have a democracy, we will once again have an enormously greater control over our borders, over who comes to this country, whether they're a threat to us and whether they're not. We will be able to deal with all those issues. For me as a mother, for my children, for my grandchildren I hope to have someday, this is a vote for once in a generation. And it's quite clear to me that EU is yesterday's game. The UK's future is global, and with all my heart, as well as with all my head, I desperately urge you to take back control and vote Leave on June the 23rd. Andrea Leadsom, thank you very much indeed. Amber Rudd.
Thank you. Well, tonight what we've heard is complete fantasy from the Vote Leave team. And actually, it reminds me of one of my favourite films when I was a child, which was The Wizard of Oz. A land of fantasy, of fun sounds and fun activities, but then when you pull back the curtain, there is nothing there. And we have had nothing of evidence here of what the Vote Leave campaign are proposing. And from Boris, well, he's the life and soul of the party, but he's not the man you want driving you home at the end of the evening. This is a very serious choice we have to make. There are 14 days to go. We have a strong place in the centre of Europe. It makes us stronger, safer and better off, which means more jobs at home, lower prices at home and more influence for our country. That's where we should be, leading, not leaving.
Andrea, thank you. Stuart.
This is our last chance to take back control. If you would not vote to join now, then do not vote to stay. I'm a mother and I'm a grandmother, and I want my children and grandchildren to grow up in a strong and confident country. And we don't have to choose between trade and democracy. Countries across the world trade with Europe without giving away permanent control. A vote to stay is dangerous. It means handing over more and more power and money to unelected elites and bureaucrats every year. We will be trapped in a system where we are outvoted by the countries which have the euro as their currency. We will not be able to control our borders and have a say in who has the right to live and work here. I am an immigrant. I believe in Britain, and I wouldn't dream of talking down this country. That's why I'm saying to you on June the 23rd, vote Leave and take control.
Stuart, thank you very much indeed. Nicola Sturgeon.
The Leave campaign wants to focus on what we supposedly lose by being in the EU. I ask you to think more about what we have gained. The longest uninterrupted period of peace in modern history. The world's biggest single market of 500 million people to sell our goods and services into. Guaranteed protections for workers so that big multinationals and right-wing politicians can't force a race to the bottom. The freedom for all of us to travel freely in Europe. The ability, by working together, to tackle more effectively big challenges like climate change and security that no country can deal with alone. And none of that has meant giving up on independence. The UK, France, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Ireland are all independent countries, but independent countries that choose to work together for the greater good. Let's keep hold of all of these gains. Vote Remain on the 23rd of June.
Sturgeon, thank you. Boris Johnson.
I think that what the last couple of hours, and indeed this whole campaign, have shown is there is a contrast between this side of the argument that is offering hope and that side of the argument that is offering nothing but fear about life outside. They say that we can't do it on our own. They say that we can't leave the EU. We say that we can. We say that we're a great country. They say that we have absolutely no choice. I listened to Amber Rudd's metaphor. We have no choice but to stay locked in the back of the EU car, driven in the wrong direction, going to a destination we do not want to go. We say we can take back control. Take back control of huge sums of money, take back control of our borders, take back control of our economic policy, our tax, our trade, and take back control of our democracy. Because that is fundamentally what this is all about. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for this country to speak up for democracy around the whole European Union. And I hope we do on June the 23rd.
Boris Johnson, thank you. And Angela Eagle. Thank you, Angela Eagle.
The Labour Party has always been the party of work and the party of jobs, and that is exactly what this referendum is about. But don't just take my word for it. Listen to Britain's trade unions and listen to the economic experts. They say leaving Europe will damage the economy, cost jobs and put workers' rights at risk. And let's face it, it won't be Boris Johnson who'll suffer the consequences of a smaller economy. It'll be those of you at home who've already suffered enough through Tory cuts. And those who want to use this vote to give the Tory party a bloody nose, I say this. I have fought the Tories all my life, but this is not a referendum on the government. It's about the future of our country. And the Labour Party believes passionately that our future lies in Europe. So for decent jobs, better opportunities and strong rights at work, vote Remain on June the 23rd.
Thank you all very much indeed.